Hello, everyone, and we are really excited to be here with you today. We're just going to give it a few seconds, not minutes, to let everybody in who has clicked the attend button to join us for this amazing LinkedIn Live today. I can't wait to share with you who I'm talking to today about demand-driven planning and so much more. So let's just give it just a couple more seconds, and then I will introduce the session for today. Super excited to be here with you for our lunch and learn. We've got a lot of exciting information to share with you today. So can't wait to do that, and just want to give it another couple of seconds for everybody to join us. All right, so let's get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream today, brought to you by Demand Driven Technologies. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I am the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain and Blended, and I have DD Tech CEO Erik Bush here with me today. So Erik and I first met in person about a year ago when I moderated a panel as part of the Demand Driven Technologies 2021 user conference. It was a great event, and I really enjoyed my part in it because Erik and I talked all about the evolution of the demand-driven movement. We took it all the way back to the 80s and moved through the decades, looking at how the cultural backdrop really shaped the movement and brought it to where we are now. I mean, it was fantastic, a little bit different from the usual, but really enlightening. So if any of today's listeners tuned into that, give us a shout and let us know. And Erik, I'm thrilled to be working with you once again. So welcome to the stage today.
It's great to get the band back together. Time to get back into big hair days again, like we did last year.
I know.
It was a lot of fun.
It was amazing. I loved it. And today, Erik and I are also joined by Ivan Lavatelli, Head of Core Operations for PwC Italy and Global DDMRP Practice Lead. Ivan has over 20 years of consulting experience in operations management, supply chain management, and company-wide turnaround programs. So we're honored to have him here as well. So welcome, Ivan, and thank you so much for joining us all the way from Italy.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Erik. It's an honor for me to be here, and I hope that this international experience can be useful for all our attendees.
I am so sure that it's going to be. So now today we're talking about an area of supply chain that is really growing in importance, and that's resilient planning. We all know that the pandemic highlighted a lot of gaps and weaknesses across the industry. It showed that for an industry whose professionals are used to dealing with, 10 different problems a day, we were remarkably ill-equipped for agility and resilience. And we soon discovered that there was very little flex within our operations, and a lot of that was down to dated silo ways of working and a firefighting approach to innovation. So as soon as we could start to breathe again, the industry reassessed and quickly started to realize that resilient planning was going to be vital moving forward if we were going to avoid another disaster. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, we're going to be taking questions throughout the discussion and at the end of our session today. So feel free to ask all of your questions in the comments section because there are no wrong questions here, and we are going to try to get to all of them. So let's just start talking about the phrase resilient planning. What do we mean by that, Erik?
I think we should probably change the words around a little bit. Planning for resilience is probably a better way of saying it, because really what we're after is the ability to help create for the company the ability to respond to whatever comes their way. And too often, the way traditional planning is done, we're working in a manner that we're trying to get to a consensus demand plan and line all the resources up around that, assuming that everything's going to work out according to that plan. And in fact, as we've seen, especially of late, that's not really a valid premise to be working from. So I think resilient planning, or planning for resiliency or agility, is about looking at the problem in a different angle and really thinking about not just one demand plan that we're trying to align to, but rather what is the range of scenarios we might encounter, and then taking actions to affect how we operate to give us more flexibility so that whatever comes our way, we're able to respond to in a much better way than we have in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing all sorts of things from shortages to overbuying now. Some of the larger retailers have sales on because they've overbought. And there's just so many different scenarios that are happening right now. And we need to be prepared for that, I think, next time. We weren't as well prepared for it as I think that we thought that we would be, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how has the pandemic changed the way we think about resilient planning? So, Yvonne, we're going to start with you and then we're going to go to Erik.
Yeah, my view on that is on two key aspects. One for sure is the one mentioned by Erik, which is the way we should plan. So not accordingly to a given and fixed forecast for demand, but rather more in line with the actual sales that they are coming, and be prepared for that through some sort of new paradigm in setting up our value chain for uncertainty. And the second point of view to me is not really related to planning per se. It's more related to the way the strategic setup of the supply chain is chosen.
Yeah.
So no matter what the planning system you use, you need to prepare for flexibility from a strategic standpoint. And the pandemic proved to be a big challenge for value chains that were very dispersed, very globalized. We've seen troubles in getting material from Far East. We are seeing troubles in getting the crops from the war zones in Ukraine. So at the very end, there are two directions. One is to move towards a wiser setup of your supply chain, which combines network redesign and the structural plan for resilience when you select your value chain partners.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is to have a better system to plan, considering the setup you have selected. So the combination of those two things are the basic and fundamental weapons to fight the new battles. And as far as we've seen, the future will present us with new challenges. So the worst is yet to come.
No, don't say that. No, I do want to, before we go to Erik on that question, I do want to ask you, because I've been hearing the words value chain a lot more over the last couple of years. How is value chain different from supply chain?
A value chain includes not only the flow of material, but also flow of information and the flow of the way the product is conceived. For instance, if you think about the way the car manufacturing industry evolved, that's astonishing. So we started with the say Ford model, with a lot of vertical integration from the mine to the dealer. So everything was under the control and the umbrella of Ford Motor Company, including raw material processing, development of subsystems, assembly, and transportation to the dealers. And then the industry evolved. I'm referring to the manufacturing industry. So you had the players more focused on the core value, which is the assembly, and they outsourced also, design, sometimes of subsystems. And what you see now is the return to this vertical integration. If you see the Tesla model, the new fight is procure the right material and have an end-to-end value chain planning of what is the current product and what will be the future product, which is a strategic view on the way you need to set up your system of players within the value chain in order for everybody to be aligned. And on that system, you need to have a thorough planning system to make it work. And that's the second ingredient.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. We actually just talked about an article around Tesla yesterday on my live show around how they're focusing on innovation because of the chip shortage. And so they're not releasing new vehicles at the moment. They're focusing on how to reduce how many chips that they actually have in their vehicles. So that's a great example, and I appreciate you for sharing that. Now, Erik, over to you. How are we planning for all of this, or how has the pandemic changed the way we think about resilient planning?
I think that the biggest change has been that it exposed the vulnerabilities of conventional planning. You know, if we think about the concept of material requirements planning, or MRP, it starts with the concept of tell me what the demand will be, and we'll backwards schedule what we need to buy, manufacture, assemble, package, and deliver to meet that demand. And obviously, that has a incredibly important assumption in there, and that demand forecast is accurate, which we've seen over and over again is a flawed assumption, a very perilously flawed assumption. So the whole concept behind demand-driven planning is wait till the last possible moment you can before committing any supply or any action. The most accurate demand signal you're going to find in the market is the real orders coming from your customers. And by just taking that change in philosophy, kind of, you mentioned Tesla and Elon Musk, you know, he always uses first principle thinking, boil any problem down to where there can be no underlying assumptions. The underlying assumption in all the planning systems that are on the market today assumes that the only way we can solve to meet that demand when it comes in is to do a forecast. And we're proving with DDMRP that we can find other ways to achieve that goal. And that gives us, by definition, a more resilient, more agile way of responding to the market. Because instead of worrying about the forecast so much, we size the stock position, or the buffer as we call it, to address variation. And the more we understand variation, the more we create agility and resilience in our supply chain. So I think the whole concept of demand-driven is really at the core of and lays the foundation for moving to more resilient planning, not just in how we set up replenishment orders for materials we're buying on a regular basis, but also how it infuses it into the S&OP landscape, because it poses different questions in sales and operations planning than what have been traditionally thought of. Things like a consensus demand plan become now a range of scenarios we need to be able to adapt to. And planning in that horizon is just not the way it works in convention in most companies. They're lucky to get a consensus demand plan put together on a monthly or quarterly basis, let alone evaluate the impact that a range of scenarios would have. And it sounds so simple, but it has profound implications. And I think that's the real important message I would want to convey here is we have to go back and challenge all those core assumptions that are behind all the software that we've been using for so many years, and recognize that there are better ways to do this, more responsive ways to do it, and more resilient ways to do it.
Well, and you mentioned conventional planning. So talk to us a little bit about what that actually means, and how is resilient planning different from that conventional planning?
Yeah. So conventional planning, I'll use it in an S&OP standpoint. We're going to get the whole team together. We're all going to get aligned to what that demand plan is going to be, right? We're going to sing Kumbaya, and everybody's going to be bought in that that's exactly what's going to happen. And by the time we've gone through the organization to get everybody aligned to that picture, the assumptions underlying that plan are already starting to erode, right?
Right.
And that's a fool's errand. I did that a lot when I was at IBM. You know, I was in VP of Ops for the consulting division. We had these long range plans that we were putting together. And by the time you actually got to starting to execute against that plan, you knew a lot of the assumptions you'd made were no longer valid. And I think that's a really bad way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we can instead get quicker to a range of scenarios and have the ability to test how flexible we'd be if this happens, if that happens, now we start to raise different questions. How do we build more resilience? Maybe we need extra capacity than we would have thought of in a normal cost management standpoint so that we can respond if the market shifts.
Right.
Maybe we need to constrain our plan if we find out that there are certain materials that we can't get in adequate supply, like chips. And instead of continuing to produce and buy other materials at a rate that constraint is not going to allow us to consume, which causes us to then have extra inventory, we can be far more flexible and adaptable to whatever is coming in the execution horizon.
Yeah, we can see that that's becoming even more important. Now, Yvonne, I'm seeing you nod your head. So I think that you want to jump in here and just sort of reiterate what Erik
Yeah,
is saying.
correct. That's correct, because Erik explained one side of the coin, which is the demand side. So demand is not always accurate. If we think about forecast, this was valid since the beginning of forecasting exercises. So we all know the first rule of forecast is that forecast is always wrong by definition, and the more distant we go into the future, the worse it is. So demand side is the one side of the coin. But what we saw in our experience recently, and linked with the pandemic, the war, the energy crisis, is a further difficulty in the supply side. So procurement lead times, manufacturing lead times,
Yeah.
those are not fixed value anymore. So we need to survive, and with the degree of precision we are able to obtain within our value chains, and we need to accept that our supplier cannot be 100% on time in full. And if we plan according to, on one end, a perfect forecast that will be materializing in a given time horizon, plus a perfect sequence of procurement, manufacturing, transportation lead times, it's like we are planning for a failure.
Yep.
Right.
The whole concept of demand-driven planning, which has the main goal of being more resilient, is actually to be prepared for variety. Variety is in our supply chain today, it will be tomorrow. So instead of planning for the perfect plan and ending up with suboptimal use of resources, let's decide which challenges we are able to take. Let's make bets and investments into strategic points in our value chain in order to decouple this information flow, and to decouple the supply side with the material flow, and run a true pull system so that you respond only to what you are able to sell. Of course, there are mechanics here and mechanisms that we need to fine-tune. What I have discovered in my experience is that this is not something for the large corporations only. So what astonished me, what astonished me is that when you look at the latest advances in the supply chain planning softwares and the like, immediately you in your mind try to link this to investments that may be done by large corporations. I think that the world demand-driven movement proved this to be accessible and very transparent, and I wouldn't use the word easy to apply, because it's not easy at all, but I would say it's definitely easier that pretend to evolve towards some sort of magic box that will come up with a perfect forecast. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And possible, right? I think the word here is also possible. So we've got some really great questions from Matt, Andre, Victor. We're going to be answering some of those questions near the end of the discussion, but we're also having some great discussions within the comments as well. And I want to ask the audience, how many of you know about demand-driven planning? So comment in the comment section and let us know how many of you know about it or want to know more about it. We'd love to hear from you. And again, we're going to get to those questions in a little bit. But let's take a moment to expand on the issues of that conventional MRP planning, because billions industry-wide have been spent on ERP systems. And the reality is the inventory turnover rates have not really improved in decades. So why is that? Ivan, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to go to Erik.
Two things. The first one is variety has evolved over time. So I would say, on one end, this is natural because if you look at our product variety, it is exploding more and more. And variety means more inventory at the very end. So that's one point. We cannot do that. We are a world of increasingly more sophisticated people willing for variety. Okay, so that's one side. But on the other hand, I think that the traditional planning has exposed our supply chains to the flows of being certain of what is going to happen. So what Erik was explaining, that you try to align everybody on a perfect plan and the assumptions are not valid after a while. So and new systems over there pretending to have a better forecast proved to be ineffective because the operational mechanism of procuring material and releasing the supply orders were not valid. And so that's my point of view on that.
Great. And then Erik, what's your point of view on this? I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of things to sort of unpack here. Data accuracy issues, software might be the wrong match for business, leadership or employee adoption. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I didn't get all this gray hair for nothing. I've been in the industry for a long, long time. And, what was most notable, I was in the consulting division of IBM from like 90 forward to when I retired in 2010, and obviously been dedicated to the supply chain space since then with DD Tech. But back in the mid 90s, there were three fundamental issues that people in the IT space were worried about. One was the cost of legacy software maintenance. Back then, most companies were running on their own ERP system per se. They had come up with their code. There weren't packages in much prevalence back in the early days. And so they had built their own software. And the burden of maintaining that was unbearable. It was getting them into a very bad situation. They also were suffering from islands of automation, where they had built a system for this function and that function and whatnot. They didn't talk very well together. Integration tool sets weren't very effective back in the day. And so that was a mess if you were a CIO. And then the final problem was the threat of Y2K. Right. A lot of folks on this call will not remember what that was
I
about.
I remember.
But it was a big issue. And so you had kind of a convergence of issues. And along come the ERP systems, SAP, Oracle, the like, who are saying it's all in one database. Mm-hmm. So it's all fully integrated. We're going to maintain it for you so you don't have that burden of all that resource that you've dedicated to that. And it's already Y2K compliant. And my God, this is a wonderful story to hear. The business users here, and we're going to get all new software. So in companies like SAP, well, it's highly configurable and we can make it fit automotive and we can make it fit chemical and we can make it fit pharma and all this stuff. And so it just seems like, and there's gold rush. So from mid 90s to 2010, by that point, most of the legacy systems have been removed from the ecosphere. They're just not there anymore. And yet at that point, the needle hasn't moved. Inventory turnover rates today are still, for US manufacturers, what they were 25 years ago. So in reality, as one of the CIOs I met with back in my career in Northern Ohio at a big tire company you all might know, said this is an IT project. It wasn't a business project, right? So we weren't solving the business need. The packages that were coming out were using the same MRP concepts that were codified back in the 70s for IBM at the time, who was interested in spreading the use of computing outside of financial and accounting applications and stuff like that. So it's not surprising to see what's happening. And then to the points Ivan was making, one of our clients, Michelin, if you look at tire sales in the US, back in the 70s, there were 10 sizes that made up 90% of the automotive tire sales. Today, if you look at the top 10 sizes, they're not even a third of the market. And you just drive down the road, you
Right.
see so this product proliferation has worked against the companies.
Yeah.
Offshoring of production has extended lead times and worked against them. The systems haven't improved and things like that. So it's not surprising to see that we've kind of gotten to this inflection point now where I think the market and the clients I've talked to say, we realize we need a backbone. We need an ERP system that kind of serves as the anchor and the foundation. But they're very much saying, we're going to buy best of breed solutions in the specific functional areas.
Right.
Because we can get a specialized, deeper value out of that proposition. And if you have any doubt about that, just look what Salesforce.com did to the customer relationship management part of the ERP landscape. They came in with a much better solution. They've become a category of themselves all alone in a whole ecosystem. And so I think it's indicative of the pendulum swinging back now, where integration tools are far more superior than they were back then. We live in an integrated world. Just look at all the things you can do with your cell phone. The need for specialized solutions in specific areas like supply chain planning or integrated business planning is absolutely there. And the market is wide open because nobody really owns that market. And I think that's what's so exciting for us, is to see the chance to bring true value to our clients, get them to get the needle to move and sustain that improvement, and do it in a more user-friendly and functional way than what they've been accustomed to in the past.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the SKUs because, we've been hearing about SKUs being reduced all over the place. Restaurants, retailers, they're
Yeah.
really focusing on the data around what is being sold, like their major sellers and things like that, and reducing some of the SKU count that they've increased over the last few years. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And what you're talking about really is that ERP systems were kind of sold as a magic solution. So Yvonne, I want to ask you, do you think the overall industry mindset is really ready for the next step? I think Erik kind of alluded to it. So I'd like you to sort of expand on that, if you will.
Yeah, I think this is a very hot topic. So today, whenever I meet a client or a prospect, the first thing here they ask me is always how to properly execute the order commit process, which is typically that I need the date to promise to my customer, and I want this to be a robust date. So this is the problem companies have today.
Right.
Okay. What we've seen is that industry is prepared. All the industry are curious about the new possibilities that resilient planning is bringing. I've been living this movement in the, I would say, last 5 years of my careers already, starting when I met first Erik and I got interested in the demand-driven movement. Okay. So I'm a kind of a late comer, if you will, considering Erik one of the founding father of this movement in a way.
Your grandpa.
But since then, I met with hundreds of companies, and they are all curious about this new thing. And what I ended up with understanding is that a lot of companies were already thinking in this way. So sometimes you talk with the supply chain planner of the demand-driven planning concepts, and after a while you discover that they were doing something similar, trying to like tweak the system they have through some sort of like external Excel sheets, where they were trying to get a good plan in order to be an executable one. Not the perfect one, an executable one.
Right.
And I believe industry is ready. And another point that I want to make is that technology is affordable. So I think this is a big game changer. So we've seen companies from 20 million turnover to billions using this best of breed solution like the one from DDTech. You can scale your implementation to whatever size you need to manage. You can add complexity while you already are live with the new system. So there are possibilities of having incremental improvements in the implementation, but you are live in months, or we'll say 3 months typically. So we went live today with a client with Erik's solution. It was a 3-month project. So it's a small client, not a lot of SKUs, but I mean it was relatively easy. So I think the industry is ready. So it's very promising, and I would say the technology is there. So when I start this journey, what I was saying to the clients is, okay, I recognize, I acknowledge that it's a risk to try this.
Right.
Today, after what we've been committing so far, like all the crisis or the competition, whatever, I would say that since a lot of players already embraced this change, going towards a demand-driven movement, today I would say it's a risk not to try, because if your competitor succeed in this, then you need to do something to survive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and be competitive advantage, or have the competitive advantage against your competitors as well. So I want to ask the audience, because again, we've got a really good conversation happening over on LinkedIn, is what kind of challenges are you facing within the realm of what we're talking about today? We want to hear from you. So put those in the comments as well. And so, of course, the current climate has not made it easy for our people or technology to keep up. So we're going to dive deeper into some of those challenges and pain points that you really spoke about, Yvonne, that a lot of companies are facing right now. And that's why we want the audience to jump in here and tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're facing. And I think there's a real need for a new planning approach, right? From predictability to agility, what we've been talking about. And so let's look at how demand-driven methods combined with the adoption of new technology can start to address these issues to really revolutionize the future of supply chain planning. So Erik, I'm going to turn it over to you. I mean, we're hearing about artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital supply chain twins, hyperscale cloud platforms. I mean, there are some big words being floated around in the industry. So let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really critical to recognize that technology for technology's sake is not the right answer, right? So we need to direct our energy at solving the right problems. And so I'd like to kind of I want to spend a couple minutes on this, Sarah, but I got to share this kind of metaphor with the team, because the way I look at it, and I've got the gray hair to go along with this, that the planner today is in an incredibly challenging environment because the systems have so much complexity to them. It's largely because over time, every customer asks for new features and new things, and we've added all these knobs and switches and buttons into the software to the extent that now they are intimidated by not knowing what to do with this switch or that button or this knob or whatever. And it's like they're the astronauts back in the Apollo space capsule, right? Where they were literally part of the computer because they didn't have battery life, they didn't have good CPUs, they were part of the engine, right? Mm-hmm. And yet you see today in the conventional environment, just what Ivan was talking about, where people are taking data out of the system, putting it in Excel because they don't trust what's going on, because they are overwhelmed. I talked with our large enterprise clients. One of the biggest challenges they've got is turnover in the workforce that use these systems. Younger people growing up with, iPhones and touch screens, and they look at this and saying, you got to be kidding me, right? So we have to find a way to take the complexity out of it. And I always challenge my team with, if Steve Jobs were here and got fascinated with supply chain, we'd have different software out there. Totally believe that. I mean it. There's got to be a better way.
Right.
And if you kind of contrast what SpaceX and Dragon Capsule are doing, where they send civilians to outer space for 3 or 4 days with an iPad and a cool looking spacesuit, why can't we get supply chain planning to that kind of a paradigm, right? Yeah. So it's about having the right goal in mind. It's not about celebrating the complexity. It's about looking at that as a constraint to the user being able to trust and rely on the system to do the job for them, all right? AI ML has a huge role to play in this. And unlike most of the AI ML that I've seen out there, which is all about trying to get a better forecast, I think we need to direct our energies in a different way. I'm sure you have Shazam on your phone.
I do.
You hear a song and you want to recognize what it is, you hit the Shazam button, and literally, no matter what part of the song is playing, within a few seconds, it can tell you the artist, the album, all the credits. It can even give you the lyrics for the darn song and the like.
Yep. Put it in my playlist.
Right? Well, if you map out demand variation for an item, it has a fingerprint to it. It has a pattern. And unfortunately, the techniques that are in wide use in the industry, where we take coefficient of variation, which is the standard deviation of the demand divided by the average demand, to come up with a measure of how variable it is, not really that reliable, because we've seen through all the simulations we do with our clients that items with the same variation will not behave the same and need different settings, right? And so the work we're doing with our AI ML team, which is now coming into the first release of product functionality, is that we can do a better job with this pattern recognition kind of concept at arriving at the appropriate settings. So if that takes a few of those switches off the dashboard or the console for the planner, that's where we need to go, right? To make it to where you put your data in, the system figures out, and it shows you and proves to you that it's going to be reliable. Now you've gained trust in the system. There still needs to be a pilot in the flight across the Atlantic when I go to see Iran and Milan, but most of the time they're not flying the plane. On exception, they get involved if there's a storm to navigate around for specific events like takeoff and landing and whatnot. But we should be able to see much, much more reliance on automation and a system that we know we can trust, right? There's variations, there's bumps on the flight and all those things, but somehow it all seems to work out. And so we absolutely believe that we can go a long way in that direction. Digital twins, I think, are another critical part of this, where you can actually have a sandbox, and we've enabled this for a number of our clients, to go play with the parameters, because you still need that visceral buy-in as a user that the settings that have been configured in your environment are going to work for you. That also helps you do this agility or resilient planning, because now feed it a bunch of different forecast scenarios, see where it shows the pressure points are going to merge or where the opportunities are going to merge. Maybe you've got some hidden capacity that you could exploit in a much better way if you change your product mix or things like that. So I think there's just so much potential in this new modern era with cloud computing and AI and ML appropriately applied, where we can change this paradigm dramatically for customers out there. And that's kind of the whole idea behind our IntuiFlow software, is to get you to that point. It's a long journey. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're so excited about the progress that we're making and the feedback we're getting.
Well, tell us about it, because that sort of segues into my next question, is that you have launched that since I last saw you.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. How does it work? How do you help the customers through it? Give us some insight into that. And then once we talk about that, we're going to go into the questions that we have from the audience and get into those as well.
Sure. So it's a marketing question. The big change here was the following. We had the first DDMRP solution in the market, and we, I think, are legitimately by far the company with the most deployments around the world. We have about 130 clients with hundreds of locations all around the world using that solution. What we didn't have was the production, scheduling, and execution into the cloud environment. We had a solution that was client server based, but we wanted to migrate that into the cloud. And harmonizing, it's called the demand-driven operating model, if you study the DD methods and ideas. And it complements material planning through DDMRP with production scheduling and execution through demand-driven capacity scheduling, built largely on theory of constraints, drum buffer rope ideas. Those fuse together in a really incredibly important way. And they further, enable this kind of responsiveness that we're talking about on the call today. So with the release of that software, we wanted to rebrand. We thought it was a good time to do that. It also coincided with the first releases of our functionality on the AI ML front. And it was kind of a stepping off point, if you will, for the company to really get fully committed to this long range vision of I just kind of described to you. The Dragon capsule gets talked about every day in our office. And I think it's an inspiring idea for our team. And it resonates well with the clients I've shared it with. In the early days, I was kind of a little bashful about that, but now having, told the story and heard the feedback from clients about how, boy, if we could do that, that would be phenomenal. That's kind of what we're chasing.
Amazing. Amazing. I love to hear that. So now I think we should get to some of the questions from the audience.
Before we go there, let me add a couple of
Sure.
points of view to
Yes,
what
please.
Erik has described, because I think we need to balance in between having a black box solution versus having a transparent approach to supply chain planning.
Great point.
And there are stages there. So the risk I see in the trend Erik was explaining is that we get back to the black box kind of solution where the user is not the driver of the system.
Right.
So there is a change management in between. You need to understand the basics, fundamental, rely on trust, and then move towards a kind of lights off supply chain planning kind of concept, so that you have this autopilot, but it's an autopilot you can trust. You can tweak, you can see, you can touch, and you can understand, and you can
It's got a radar screen. It's got instruments that help you see that it's doing its job and gains the trust. Exactly what we're after.
Yeah, that's one point. The second one comment I wanted to make to technology and the digitalization within supply chain is that very often we underestimate traditional lean concepts at the shop floor. So my first job was an industrial engineer, assembly lines, layouts, and material synchronization in the shop floor. So I've seen very expert theory of constraints, lean, whatever, doing a very great job on synchronizing manually through manual signals such as Kanbans, Junka boards, Conwhip concepts, whatever. And this was completely relying onto off-system mechanisms. So this new era and the software solutions such as Intuiflow that are able to bring together in a unique environment tactical planning, operational planning, scheduling, demand-driven scheduling with lean concept, theory of constraint concept is like adding value to the hard task of the industrial engineers in the shop floor, making things synchronizing. I think this is a very valid point. So it's like a refresh of let's say old school methodologies, which are very valid.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. So now we're going to get to some of the audience questions. So the first question we have is from Matt. Has there been any thought of applying probabilistic analysis? Erik, does that one go to you or?
Yeah, part of the AIML is analyzing and looking for the demand pattern itself. And then there are things around how likely is it that it will, I forget the proper term here, drift, that's the AIML term, drift analysis. And so it's trying to gain an understanding of the confidence level we can have that those settings will be viable. A lot of companies will use, estimated service levels of 65% or 95% or 97% or things like that. And those are factors that our AIML functionality supports. And you can dial those up or down at your discretion because some materials are less critical than others. Some clients are less critical than others. And so you've got the ability to calibrate the recommendations that come out of the system based on those thresholds. So that's very much a part of the landscape that we're building.
Well, and the scenarios. right? Just being
Yep.
able to build out scenarios and simulations
Yes.
with different probability factors is really key to how we're going to solve being flexible in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. From the beginning, I mentioned simulations earlier. We saw what was going on in the industry, lack of results, things like that. And our commitment from the very beginning, our whole competitive strategy as a business was if ERP is long, labor intensive, and the needle doesn't move, we just need to be everything that's the opposite of that. Easy to deploy, fast to implement the way Ivan was expressing, and also that the needle moves, you get a result out of it, right? So that's at the core of our DNA and how we think about it. That's why we're trying to make really smart decisions about where to apply technologies like AI, ML, make sure that they give us a better result, right?
Yeah.
And if there's situations where you don't need technology, for example, Kanban loops, the beauty of the Toyota production system and Kanban as a concept is it's simple visual signals. If the bin is empty, refill it, right? And that's how you keep the material flowing to that point on the assembly line. And those principles are at the very core of the whole philosophy behind demand-driven methods.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So now our next question is from Andre. Perhaps the presenters can unpack the 4 levels of variability: demand, supply, operational, and managerial. Then link this to DD planning and execution. What are the pitfalls? Is that
we don't
you
have
or
enough time on that one. I'm sorry.
You don't have which?
That's a great question, and I would love to have that discussion with that person who asked that.
Andre, Erik will be in touch.
Yeah, I'll pick one piece of it though that I want to harp on for just a minute, and then I'll shut up. I can't tell you how many times managers have influenced what is happening in a counterproductive manner, where either their principles about cost efficiencies, let's keep every machine on the shop floor running, even though it doesn't make sense to do that. Let's buy the cheapest that we can, even though it means that the minimum order quantity is going to represent half a year's usage, which raises the likelihood of obsolete inventory to a high degree. I think the management variability is the most problematic, right? Because too often there are decisions made that don't really have true analysis behind them and things like that. Now, my counterpoint to that would be what we've seen is that DDMRP as a method, the demand-driven methods that we've been talking about, allow us to have those conversations in a more concrete way. We can show you that if you change your MOQ from 2,000 units to 10,000, how many more days on hand you're going to have. We can convert that into what it represents in terms of working capital requirements and things like that. So the good news is that at least with the framework of the method, we can make those trade-offs more visible, right? And more meaningful conversations to have with senior leadership. And I think that what we've seen in the clients we've worked with and that those topics have come up is it's really turned the light on some kind of accepted conventions that have been in place for so many years. I think in part, this is going to go back to what Ivan was talking about, a re-verticalization of companies where, because now we've got a 120 days supply line from Asia that's likely to go longer than that because of all the other issues. Boy, if we had it 30 days away and it was domestic, even though it's going to cost more, or it's near shore, it's going to be way, way better for us. Gives us more flexibility, more agility, and all that. So
right.
I would love to have the discussion with Andre, if that was his name, and to get into that in more detail.
One point to that. My personal view is also, if we look at who are our leaders in the company, used to be leaders in our companies. Very often you have either a sales guy, someone who's able to sell, or a product guy, someone that understands the product. Very rarely used to have like a supply chain guy there. But I would say this may be the past. So I think the leaders of the future of our company, so the one that became the CEO of the company, need to understand how supply chain works. And very often what Erik was referring to, like the flaws of the traditional accounting principles that are misused for supply chain purposes, or incredibly high MOQs, or let's say a risky selection of suppliers that are not adequate to the flow of materials in our value chains, or at least the single sourcing from them, so without an alternative strategy. So all those are decisions that are at the very end are impacting the head of the company, but very often we see that there is not enough knowledge of how a supply chain works. Mm-hmm. So I think that in the future, and we started to see that. I don't know how it is in your side of the ocean, but what we've seen is more and more interest in having this kind of leaders guiding our companies with this kind of expertise. And I think it's very good news for us that we have kind of supply chain geeks.
Yeah, very, very good news. And we're definitely seeing that over here as well. Now, I've got another question from Victor. Have there been examples of the conflict in Ukraine impacting customers in Europe where they would benefit from resilient planning? Can you give us an example?
Actually, I think it's too early. It's too early to see this kind of things. So we've been running, but it's not a planning in the sense of operational planning. It's rather a strategy, an alternative strategy with some clients in the food industry in order to protect their value chain with respect to scarcity of some material. And we have a couple of food clients that managed to change the ingredients of some of their product in order for having an alternative source of supply. I cannot tell how incredibly difficult it is, because you need to recertify completely the process. But that's the only strategy we can have on that respect. And then what we've seen is that a lot of companies needed to change their, we say, organizational setup, because they kind of lost one portion of their market. They're trying to shifting products from that market to a market that was still open, and this is a big deal. And I would say that it's evolving every day. It's evolving every day. It is one of the top priority for several clients, for sure.
I want to jump in on this just to give a shout out to our friends at ABM Cloud. We have a partner led by a gentleman named Sviatoslav Olink, who is based in Kiev. And it's just been an amazing journey to see the resilience that team has shown in being able to endure. They've gotten to be even closer allies with us through their assistance, while some of their clients in the early days of the conflict had shut down operations. But actually, a number of them are back in business, and God bless them.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for bringing that to light. Now, we do have a question from Bayram. I'm just going back to it right now, and it sort of goes along with the last question as well. So how can really balance between the emergency plan due to geopolitical issue and crisis and sustainable plan for the long term? Now, we've got probably about a minute or so per question. So Erik, did you want to take this one?
Sure. I'd say the most critical part in any kind of situation like that is to narrow your focus. In other words, don't try to do everything. Pick, the top 10 SKUs or the top 10 customers or whatever. But, really narrow your scope of focus. This is one of the great things of theory of constraints, is find a point of leverage. Is in those scenarios where you've really got dire situations, you've really got to narrow your focus down to the few things that really, really matter. Prioritize well. You're going to find the right answers. You're going to have to get comfortable with some things that are going to break, because that's going to happen no matter what you do. And so you want to preserve your energy and get it to focus on those things that are most critical. It's hard to give a more effective answer than that, but that's what I think I've seen the clients who've had the best success through these difficult times, is where they really slow down, took a deep breath and figured out what are our top priorities and made sure they were maniacally focused on executing those.
Absolutely. So we've got time for one more question. We've got one from Frederico. What do you believe are leaders' competencies and skill sets needed to have resilient supply chains? Now, do you want to take that or Yvonne?
Yes.
You'll
That's
take
an
it.
Italian name, so it's got to go to
I
Yvonne.
know him. I know him. We've been working together, and I think that and let's make the example of our company. So we are a consulting company. So we need to have our people trained in the basics. Very often we see the basics are not there, simply not there. So that's the first thing: education, and you need to follow these steps. Then you need to have a kind of a guidance, and by guidance I mean an internal guidance. So a kind of a supply chain director who has been in your job and has done it, proved to be effective, and can teach you. So internal leadership is always what sets apart good companies from bad companies. That the leaders prove to be effective, and then you need to be open. So whenever we think about a potential client for the resilient planning concepts, we assess the clients on two axes. One is the level of benefit you can get from the concepts, and the other one is the level of openness/readiness. So there have been cases where you have a lot of potential benefits to be obtained, but not the right level of openness from the senior leaders. And this boils down to my previous point. So sometimes whomever can decide to change cannot understand why he needs to change. So we need to have this combination. And this comes through education and importance in the supply chain role, and also the role of contexts like this one, so that we can spread the word and speak among professionals and lookalikes, experts in this field.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So we've got time for me to just ask you, what's one takeaway that you would like the audience to walk away from this discussion with? Really quickly, what's one thing you'd like them to focus on?
I go first. I think curiosity. I think that if I were in the attendance, I would have been curious to go deep in what is behind this very concept. So I think that we hope that at least the curiosity is in whomever is attending, and I know that some of them already know how it works.
I love that. Erik, final word. What's the one thing?
I would pivot right off of what Yvonne said. To me, it's challenge the prevailing assumptions. They've been in place for so many years, decades, literally, that it's time to really ask ourselves, why does it have to be that way? I think when I first started the company, it just seemed like people had acquiesced that this is as good as it's going to get.
No.
And we can, working together, make it a lot better. But we got to challenge those prevailing assumptions to find the better answers.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. That brings us perfectly to the end of our time today. As demand-driven technology has said themselves, you can't see the future, but you can empower your business to adapt to volatile environments. And I couldn't have said it better myself. There's still work to be done, but conversations like this one really get me excited for all of the positives I know the future can bring for supply chain. A big thank you to Yvonne and Erik, and of course, the demand-driven technologies for making this live stream happen. And if you'd like to find out more or discover exactly how they can help your business, head over to demanddriventech.com. And of course, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot that you can take away and consider when it comes to your own business. Please reach out to myself, Erik, or Ivan on social media if you have any questions or anything else you'd like to share. Hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Erik.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.